Afternoon, everybody. It gives me great pleasure to have the second in our series with Vuka Way in conversation with. This is Women's Month, and we have decided to discuss issues that are pertinent to women. Yes, there's glamour. Yes, there's all the beautiful stuff, but there's reality. And one of the realities, and it's the harshest one ever, is the legal reality that women face. As you can see, we're under the banner of Vuka Way, and it's a colleague of mine, Omika, and myself in our private capacity as private consultants, working with Bunny Bhula on this project. And Bunny is the ideal person to tell you what Vuka Way is about and why she created this NPO.
Ladies, so nice to see all of you ladies. You're all looking so good for Women's Month. You know, I have been involved in tourism, so I work with a variety of people. And through my work in the last couple of years, I've seen so many gaps. People want to be involved in mainstream industry. People want to participate in programs. They don't have the confidence. They lack skills. And this was the foundations during lockdown. Out of boredom, that I ventured out and got Vuka Way as an NPO registered. Now, our primary focus is to work with like-minded ladies like yourselves. Ladies that will support one another and understand the gaps that are in the youth and in the women. Our goal in this whole program is to create a culture of thinking globally and working locally. Now, I think COVID has really helped us connect with the world for us to understand that the grass is not greener on the other side. And we will all strive together as a team to start making a difference in people's lives. Thank you, Shanta.
Thank you very much, Bunny Bhula. That's actually quite interesting. Omika, you are somebody who is very passionate about women's rights, etc. Your take on this whole idea for Women's Month?
Thank you, Shanta. You know, I said previously that for me, I understand the historical significance of celebrating women in the month of August. But as women, my belief is that we celebrate ourselves and women every single day. And going with what Bunny has just said, you know, if you educate a man, you educate a man. But when you educate a woman, you actually educate a generation. So I think when I look at women's rights, for me, women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. If we look at women's rights, they are the rights and entitlements claimed for women and girls worldwide. And gender inequality underpins many problems which disproportionately affect women. Things like sexual abuse, domestic abuse and violence, lower pay, lack or inadequate access to education and healthcare. And today I'm hoping that collectively, we're actually going to be able to look at the rights that promote and position social and legal equality in women and for women in particular.
Thank you, Omika. I've got to mention this, you know, one of the things that really bothers me with women is we look at a wife who is a second wife and we judge her. We look at a man who's got more than one partner and we judge him. But do we understand culture? Are we culturally sensitive? Looking at that, our plan for this afternoon is to look at South African law as it is. And then also to look at our cultural and traditional law, and then to look at Sharia. Because if we look at the women in our country, they're governed by one of the three. Ashika Ramgarib Sarwan. I really want to read these ladies' qualifications out. Ashika is a member of NADAL, which is the National Association of Democratic Lawyers. She holds a bachelor's degree. She holds the postgraduate in law and she holds an LLM, which is the master's degree. Served her articles in Durban and was employed at the Office of the State Attorney, dealing with the Road Accident Fund. She's currently a practicing attorney in Pietermaritzburg, married to Sanjay Sarwan, so that makes her a wife, and she's a mother to a 14-year-old. So we have the career woman, the wife, the mother. Ashika, I think asking you about South African law and how it impacts on the woman would be most appropriate.
Thank you, Shanta, for that very kind introduction, and hello to all the other ladies joining us this afternoon. By way of introduction, I would like to start by saying, you know, in South Africa, we have some of the most progressive laws and policies intended to promote women's rights and ensure gender equality. However, we also live in a country where women are hugely overrepresented amongst the poor, the homeless, and the unemployed. And of course, we live in a country with shockingly high levels of gender-based violence. So much so that it has been said that to be a woman in South Africa is more dangerous than to be one in many war-torn countries across the globe. Now, as a woman, as a lawyer, and more significantly, I would say, as the mother of a teenage daughter who will grow up to be a woman in this society, I find this completely unacceptable. And the question we need to ask ourselves now, obviously, is what do we do? Where do we go? How do we address this disjunct between our laudable laws and policies on the one hand and the reality that most women face on the other hand? And I think the key with this, as with so many other things, is education. Of course, yes, education in the broader sense, but in this context, specifically educating women about these laws and policies and how they impact on our lives as women, and educating women about the rights that these laws and policies confer. Because in the most basic sense, nobody can enforce any right of which they're completely unaware. So by way of introduction, with the time constraints we have, I thought I would spend a few minutes briefly mentioning some of the laws that we can have access to, and then maybe a few more minutes going into a bit of detail regarding one particular aspect in respect of the Matrimonial Property Act. But to begin with, just a few of the laws that are on the books that women can access when they have issues. Firstly, of course, and topically, the Domestic Violence Act, which exists to give all people, but in our context, particularly women, protection when they're experiencing domestic violence. There's also for women the Choice of Termination of Pregnancy Act, which has expanded access to abortions. There is the Maintenance Act, which has introduced innovative solutions such as the ability to garnish the wage and salary of the person who's obliged to pay maintenance, and has made it an offense to fail to pay maintenance. There is also the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act, which, as the name suggests, prohibits unfair discrimination, but it also goes on to prohibit systems that prevent women from inheriting family property and prevent policies or conduct that unfairly limit the access of women to land rights, to finance, and other resources. There are certain protections for women, especially young women, in the Children's Act, including the prohibition of the genital mutilation of female children and the prohibition on virginity testing for girls under the age of 16. The Marriage Act significantly provides for monogamous marriages, and the Civil Union Act legalizes same-sex marriage. But coming to the act, which I think many women need to understand because of its far-reaching consequences, and that, of course, is the Matrimonial Property Act. As the name suggests, it governs the marital regime and the proprietary consequences of the marital regime that people choose. In our law, there is provision for a marriage in community of property, where the spouses equally own and administer the common property. There is provision, on the other hand, for marriage out of community of property, which is where the spouses own and administer separate estates. And then we also have in our law a hybrid system, which is a marriage out of community of property, but with the application of something referred to as the accrual system. To explain how this works, you need to understand that it is essentially a marriage out of community of property. So at the commencement of the marriage, the respective spouses' estates, the property that they're bringing into the marriage, is identified and accounted for as separate estates. Once they are married, the extent to which the respective estates increase during the marriage is then accounted for. And when that marriage ends in death or divorce, the accumulation during the lifetime of the marriage is shared equally by the spouses. It is significant to note that the default setting, if I can put it that way, in our law is a marriage in community of property. So if spouses were to contract a marriage in South African law without attending to an antenuptial contract, that marriage would be in community of property. Now, in practice, over the years, I've often had people come to me after they were married to say, do you know what, we'd like to do an antenuptial contract to administer this marital property that we have. That can't be done. The word ante means before or prior. It is a contract that you are obliged in law to enter into before you are married. And if you fail to do that, your marriage will be in community of property, which, as I've said, involves the spouses equally owning and administering the common property in the marriage. It is also important to note that the consequences, the proprietary consequences, come into effect on the dissolution of the marriage. So during the lifetime of a marriage, in community or out of community of property, the spouses may not encounter these consequences on a day-to-day basis. But upon a divorce or the death of one of the spouses, for example, in a marriage out of community of property, a spouse is free to make a will and bequeath their individual estate, however they may wish to do so. And many women do not realize that until it is too late. In a marriage in community of property, a spouse is only entitled to make a will and bequeath their individual or half share of that common estate. So a spouse married in community of property has the protection of knowing that her half share of that estate will come to her irrespective of what the other spouse may bequeath in his will. Now, there are a number of other factors that we could go into, but I don't think we have the time to go into any further detail. So I would just like to end on a point that I came across that really resonated with me, and I'm sure it will resonate with the rest of you ladies. And it's this: I am no longer accepting the things that I cannot change. I am changing the things that I cannot accept. And as women in South Africa, although I've mentioned these much lauded laws, we still have a long road to go. And for ourselves and for the generations to come after us, we owe them our very best efforts. Thank you.
I actually muted myself because I didn't want to comment while you were going on. And there were so many things going on in my mind. So you've covered the law, and then we've got the two ladies who are going to follow up with the traditional aspect and Sharia. And I think Omika is the most relevant or appropriate one to introduce Linda.
Yes, I think, again, thank you, Ashika, for sharing all of that. I also sat here, and at one point I was like biting my tongue because I was so tempted to interject and to say something. But, you've covered, I think, one aspect. When we look at customs and how we as women are raised, largely the communities that we live in, their little idiosyncrasies and their rules are what we become subjected to as women. And for some people, that's all they know. That's all they understand is the customary law. And it basically dictates everything: their marriages, how they share their property, how they get inheritance, for example. All of that is often dictated by customary law, which is probably the most important thing in certain communities and the only thing that some women probably know or understand. So to talk to us about customary laws, and when I think about customary laws, it's probably been there for the longest of times, and it's probably the laws that have never been challenged in any way or form. It's just been accepted. So to share with us today customary laws and the impact that those rights, the liberties and freedoms that they have on women and how women are treated, I welcome Linda Manyati. Linda is the director at LLM Attorneys. And like Auntie Shanta said, we are privileged to have very dynamic women in our midst this afternoon. Linda holds an LLB, an LLM, and a qualification in compliance management. She is the director at Asikuhle Cooperatives Incubator. She is the chairperson at CBE Appeals Board, the chairperson at VAB Appeals Board, and she is also from NADAL, which is the National Association of Democratic Lawyers. Welcome, Linda. We're privileged to have you in our midst this afternoon. And over to you to take us through customary law.
Oh, thank you for such a lovely introduction. When you're saying it's like it's someone else. Thank you so much. As Onika has introduced me, my name is Linda Manyati. I'm an attorney, and I'm a mother, I'm a daughter. And I've got 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl. You've met my small one. The challenges that we have as women is when we speak about customary laws and then we include women's rights. Those two don't normally go together. It's only now that things have changed. So my topic is going to be talking about the evolution of women's rights in customary law and where we are now. In the past, when a woman is married and does not have a son, he only has girl children, when her husband passes away, then that woman could not inherit the estate of her husband, even though she contributed to the growth of it. For an example, if they had taxis or shops, she could not inherit that. the husband's family will be the ones that inherits that, and that caused a lot of abuse in women, and women will not be able to be financially stable, because if a husband passes away and they still didn't have a male child, it was a problem. But that all changed. And another thing is that if you are a child born out of wedlock, whether you are a female or you are a male, the only children that will be recognized when inheriting the estate of the deceased husband, it will be the ones that are born of marriage. So the ones that were born out of marriage will not even get a cent, regardless of what their financial situation is at that time. But all that has changed when it comes to which now allows women to be able to inherit their husband's estate, regardless of whether they have a male child or not. And we now, children born out of wedlock, children are all the same because of the Constitution. Now all children can inherit the same without being discriminated that you are born out of wedlock, you are born of marriage. And now every child, regardless of their gender, they are able to inherit. And then what I thought will be more interesting today is the case that is currently in the Constitutional Court. It started in the High Court, the Bavenda case, where Princess, let me just look at that. From the Bavenda appointment of her uncle is a king's daughter, so she's a princess, and she's the only heir of from her father. And when her father was deceased, the Princess Masindi was not recognized as the new queen just because of her gender. So the uncle wanted to be appointed as a king, and the uncle went to High Court and was contested the appointment, and he got the appointment and got the ruling to be appointed as a king. And Princess Masindi went to court, to the Supreme Court of Appeals, and challenged the judgment, and her appeal was upheld. And now she has been, and this was in November 2019, she was recognized as the new king. It says here in the Sunday World, the 16th of November 2019, that she's going to be ascending her throne. But also, it's still, that is not final. It has gone to the Constitutional Court so that it gets a final ruling there. And the traditional houses have been asked to submit all their views and assist the court in reaching this judgment. And already they have filed saying that they have no problem with a female taking over as a queen. In our law, in our customary law, it's unheard of a female taking a throne. It's unheard of because there's this perception that kingdom belongs to that clan. If I'm Linda Manyati, it belongs to the Manyati clan. And if as a female, I cannot be married to another Manyati. I must be married to someone else from another surname. That means my blood will be tainted. and then the children that are born of will have the royal blood, but now they cannot be called Manyati because I'm a female. So as a female, I am obliged to take my husband's surname. So that means because of that, women could not inherit any thrones. And right now, this is a change. This case is going back in October, and we are excited to hear what is going to happen, because we understand the tradition, trying to preserve the kingship of the Bavenda, but also we understand the woman's rights of being the rightful heir. So in England, we're looking, there is a queen, and she's married, but her children are able to inherit. Why can't we, in our traditional law, have the same application? Because if another person from another royal family marries her, that kingdom is not lost. It's still within the rightful place. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen there. Just to close off, when it comes to women and the evolution of rights, in the past, women, right now I'm in my homestead in Vulindlela under Chief Mkwanazi. For my parents to be able to get this land and live in under the Makosi Act and the traditional leaders, Gonyama Trust, my father I had to have a father. If it was just my mother, we will not be going to be able to have this land. So those are things that women were facing, that if you get divorced and you have nowhere else to go, you end up being a kitchen girl or going to the suburbs if you can afford, because you cannot get land that you are entitled to as an African person under Ngonyama Trust. You couldn't get it just because you are a female. And that caused a lot of poverty, as women couldn't be able to put their children under one roof as a result. So now all that has changed with the constitution, discrimination against with discrimination act. So now the leadership, the traditional leaders cannot discriminate against women just because of their gender and not give them give them what is rightfully theirs. Now women, you see a lot of houses, homes here that are women-headed, and it's now becoming a norm. So I would say hands up to the constitution and the evolution that we've had. As much as customary law is a patriarchal law, this is changing. This is changing. And we're looking forward to the Bavenda case and the outcome, what it's going to favor, because this is going to be a huge change in women's rights. Thank you.
Linda, thank you so much. You know, I didn't think this was going to land up being a two-part recording, but with the wealth of information, there's just no ways that we can do justice to Sharia unless we have that in the second part of this recording. Because I'm sure, Ashika, you would like to go on to that and make comment on what Linda has had to say with regard to customary. And then, you know, of course, we listen to Raisa, and that's going to be about Sharia. And then you three lawyers will be comparing your regular South African law, customary law, and Sharia law. So I think it's absolutely appropriate now that we end and that we start the next recording in a few minutes. And that's going to be absolutely exciting because we've heard customary, we've heard South African law, and now it's going to be Sharia. And so many people are ignorant of Sharia law. When I mention Sharia law, you know, they look at me like, what are you talking about? And then I say to them that people of Islamic faith are bound by managing their lives in a certain way. And to them, Sharia law is important. So I spoke about respecting each other in the beginning. I spoke about understanding each other. And I think this is what we want to do before we judge anybody. Understand the background they come from. So thank you very much for part 1. And in a few minutes, we have part 2 coming on. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.